Babe?
Yeah.
Hi, friends. So, this is going to be a short but succinct and powerful testimony, along with a call to action about Carla's calling on her life in palliative care, but also why we're so inspired to keep promoting the two projects that Carla's been pushing forward for raising funds for. And so this video is really going to help. She's been wanting to do this for a while. So we applaud her for her courage of sharing this. These can be hard stories sometimes, but they're important. And so my wife, Carla, after 10 years of nursing, when she first started nursing, after 10 years of kind of nursing in all different areas and being quite the student as always, had two major life circumstances happen that really changed the course of her life and the direction of her life and our family's life. And she wants to share about that. But the next 10 to 15 years of nursing would really be honed in and focused on this specialty, which she'll go into of palliative care and hospice care and just giving people dignity when they die because of these two encounters or because of these two circumstances. And so I'm going to let her share that with you. If I think of any questions, I'll ask her. I'm just here to aid her in this process of sharing it with you guys. Stay to the end of the video because you're going to get to hear details on the amazing progression of the palliative care program, the clinic here in the village, and the pathology lab we're working on. And also, you'll see pictures in the video as well. I'll throw them in, but pay attention. This is why Carla is the amazing woman she is. For 10 years, you did what? What was the
For
first
10
10 years of
years,
nursing?
so I became a nurse actually Ian and I got married in 1999. Then I became a nurse officially in 2000.
Yeah.
So I've been a nurse, but I've been in healthcare more longer than that, but a nurse practicing for 25 years. So the first 10 years I worked in the transplant, mostly transplant dialysis. So I, for 10 years, took care of chronically ill. Um, I mean, the turnover of people dying weekly was just immense from liver disease, from liver cancer, kidney disease. Palliative care and hospice was not something we really understood or talked about. We would consult hospice when a patient was to go home when we found cancer, but it just wasn't something we were taught.
So let me pause
in
you
the
there. But this
specialty.
ended up being
Mhm.
this ended up being a gem for you of learning.
Mhm.
I remember you coming home many, many nights, and even though there was high turnover of death or people coming out, there was also quite a few people that were chronically stuck there.
Yeah.
And you'd come home with the stories of like, I like this patient because of this, or this one drives me crazy. I have to have
Yeah.
patience with them and love
Yeah.
them well, and you were really sad when they did die, or if they lived, you were super excited, and it became this thing in your heart of like you began to see life and dignity in a different way. I would say because of that, wouldn't you? Like because of that
Yeah,
experience.
yeah, because we would have patients that couldn't have a transplant, so they became kind of like family. I remember having the same patient when I left the unit in 10 years, that same patient was still alive. So I had the same patient for 10 years, where nurses before me had the same patients for close to 20 years because of chronic disease. So yeah, you got to know them very well, and but it also got exhausting to have patients that long and to then have them die in the hospital the way they died. They usually
Yeah.
died during CPR. There wasn't a lot of discussion about end of life or the progression of disease and how you would die. Some would die suddenly on dialysis. So it was pretty, when I look back, it was pretty intense and traumatic work.
Yeah. A lot of the family members didn't know the deep conversations
no,
you
like I
had
wish I
with
could,
their people
yeah,
and
I
like
wish I could
with
go
their
back with
patients.
the knowledge I know now in palliative care and change a lot of discussions, but palliative care then wasn't even a thing. It
But
was
it really,
hospice, you're gonna die
it was
care.
definitely God setting you up.
Yeah,
I would think
definitely.
because not only with the relationship side,
Mhm.
but with the
Clinically.
medication,
Yeah,
clinically
clinically.
bedside,
Mhm.
people's lungs, people's hearts, people, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so then what shifted? What transitioned you to um, this focus?
So when my dad divorced my mom when I was around 4 years old. So we kind of had a estranged relationship. So it was in February, which actually we're the month we're in now, February of 2010. And my dad hadn't been well, and I was still working at the transplant clinic, at the transplant unit. And so I remember my dad wasn't doing well. He was part of the VA system, and he had visited in Phoenix and got some tests. And they said, "Oh, you just have this bronchitis or whatever. Go back home." And he lived up in the White Mountains.
Tobiah was born.
Several
Jaden
hours
was
for
born at this
yeah,
point. Right?
Tobiah
Two
and
of our sons.
Jaden and Gideon.
Gideon was born
small.
too, but small. Yeah.
Yeah, he was. So Gideon was born 2009 of February, so he was just a year old.
Okay.
So yeah, so then in February, I still remember it clearly. It was, I think, what holidays in February? There's some it's some military holiday. Sorry, guys. I've been out of America so long. So I remember my dad calling me and almost in tears, but he could barely talk because he said, "I've just been so sick and coughing, and I went and had this biopsy done, and it just didn't sound good, and I can't barely talk." And I could hear it in his voice, and he got weepy. And I was like, and then he said something that really threw me. And he said, "I have to walk with a cane." And I was like, no way. If you knew my dad, well, you knew my dad. He was an ex-military in the Marines in
hit you with a cane
Vietnam.
before you walked.
Yeah, he was a mountain man guy. You know, he carried his handgun underneath the seat of his car. Like, he was a mountain man. Like, so when he said that, I just thought, wow, he's very, very sick. So I remember him just being really vulnerable. And like I said, I was working at Good Samaritan Hospital in Phoenix at the time, and I was like, "Dad, this doesn't sound good." Like, and he said, "Can you help me?" Like, my dad never asked for help, and he said, "Can you help me?" I said,
I remember
yeah.
that conversation in the living room. It was a long conversation, and I knew things were about to shift.
Yeah, and literally, I want to say it was like even the next day, huh?
Yeah.
I was like, "Dad, you just need to get down here fast."
It was within 48 hours.
And I said, we'll bypass the VA system because it was so bad at the time, and I'll just have you come to my hospital. I'll talk to the doctors, and we'll bring you into there." So I remember going to work the next day and waiting, and then you brought him to the hospital, and I couldn't believe the condition he was in.
When he parked the car and got out to see me and Tobiah, his eyes were so humble, like he was having to show me what he looked like. And
but I couldn't believe he drove himself.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, this is February.
3-hour drive from Nutrios or whatever.
Yeah, it was probably more.
And he was very weak, couldn't walk really in a straight line.
He couldn't walk in a straight line because it turned out the cancer was so aggressive. So advanced, it was already into
his truck never left my house.
Yeah, his truck never left your house, is true. So that was in February, and that night, what's incredible, and I'm still so thankful for, is, I had good relationship with the medical team there. Is they brought my dad straight through the ER and admitted him to the oncology floor. And they did all the diagnostics right away, and they said, "Your dad has metastatic lung disease," meaning he has advanced disease, and they said it's in his lungs. Yeah, so he had metastatic, which means it's spread to other parts of the body. So thinking back, those times he came to visit Phoenix. So my dad got to Phoenix, yeah. And so when I called the doctors I knew well, and they were kind enough to admit him straight into the hospital, which is difficult, right to the 12th floor, which was actually our oncology, our cancer unit, before we even knew, but we suspected. And turned out, they did all the scans, and within hours, they called me and said, "Your father has lung cancer, which has metastasized to his brain, to his bones, and some other parts of his body." And so this was in February, like mid-ish February. And so that was the beginning of that short journey with my father. So that he was in the hospital a short time, and he received one dose, we call it, or one session of radiation therapy to his brain, in hopes that it would just slow the cancer. But at this stage, it was very, very advanced. And I still remember I was there for the session when he had to do his radiation. And you guys have seen in the cancer units, they have those like little bells, they ring when people are done. And this little girl came out on a cart and she got to ring the bell. And I still remember his like looking at her, and he was just so sad that she was so young and had cancer. And I don't know everything he was thinking, but he was only 61 years old at the time, and when he died. So yeah, I think he was probably processing a lot, and he just mentioned how sad he was that she was so young. I mean, it was interesting to see the empathy for her when he was the one dying himself and she was finishing her treatment. So yeah, he ended up going back up north to the White Mountains, and in between those times I just started kind of researching more about cancer and caring for people with cancer as much as I could. I loved doing research because I wanted him to have the best care, even though he was from a distance. And then I saw him another time, and then by the last time I saw him, it was only a month later. So I had gone up myself to the hospital up north where he had been admitted again. And at this time, in where he was, they had a hospice. So I worked for one of the best hospice, I would say, in the whole world, but definitely in the United States, Hospice of the Valley. So I believe, sorry, that's where I ended up going to work. So sorry, I jumped ahead, but I ended up working for Hospice of the Valley. But what I was seeing at the time with my dad's hospice it was just very limited. And he was up in the mountains, so it was very limited. So I think at the time I did the best with what I knew, but I was also limited because I was the kind of the estranged daughter, and my stepmom was there at the time.
And then also another thing that you found out and discovered was the communication breakdown between the hospital and the patient in situations like this, right? And so it sped up your urgency of needing to spend time with your dad to take care of him until the end, because you found out the hospital that should have given him the information that had broken down, hadn't it? Like
I would say
there was a progression of time that didn't have to happen the way it did.
Yeah, I mean that was 2010, and even now, Ian, when I look at the state of healthcare, like doctors still don't know how to communicate death to people in a positive and a hopeful way. So at the time, they just really didn't explain things well to my dad, and I wasn't great at it at the time. Number one, because he was my dad, and number two, I had worked in an area for 10 years where you didn't talk about death. Like it just happened suddenly. Then they would die suddenly, and it was tragic, and we just didn't. So that was part of it, and I think my dad knew because there was one time where a doctor friend came by to visit him, and he was just like, Lance, what do you have to say? Do you have any regrets? And he was basically like, I'm good, I can die now. So I was thankful for God's grace because he somehow processed very quickly within a week that he was dying. And I remember him saying, but I'm good now. My kids are grown, they're all okay. I can die.
But even the paperwork and red tape that you had to juggle, I remember from his Phoenix doctors to the Nutrioso place, like you were, I remember there was quite a rigmarole of you having to actually get the communication of basically without you saying it, like, I'm not going to let him just die in the hospital in Phoenix. He wants to go home and have quality of life there, and they hadn't communicated enough. And I think if you hadn't dug into that process, he probably would have died in Phoenix and not at your hospital. It would have been somewhere else, and it probably would have been a bitter taste and a resentment and things towards his, like a lot of that. And so
I would say that. And the other thing was my dad was a cowboy. He would have been happy to
just
expedite things himself.
Sure.
So looking back, that was a big thing: communication and continuity of care, and but in the end, I was there when he died, and sadly, it was kind of a sudden event that happened, which can happen with cancer. And it's partly why I am so honest in my communication, but also careful and patient with patients and families, because it's traumatic to be told like directly, hey, you're gonna die or your mom's gonna die. But the fact is, when you have such advanced cancer, the way the body works, you can have sudden death from other things because cancer is in your blood and it clots. And so, literally, I watched my dad die of probably what was a brain hemorrhage
But you
because of
also
the
saw
cancer.
too. You also saw your dad, and it's good that it was your dad. Someone that's
Mm-hmm.
close. There's not many people closer than your dad than your
Mm-hmm.
mom, and to have your dad witness the quality of care that's possible in hospice, I think you guys had talks about that and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was a really, really, it inspired you. He was able to encourage you of what you are really capable of,
Mm-hmm.
but also you were able to see the effects on him, and experience a lot of the love that you wanted from him, even though it was in death. You got to spend that time with him. He was so great. He was so grateful to
Mm-hmm.
have you close every minute of the day
Yeah.
for that last season. And so, um, our family, our kids, our marriage, though that was amazing, God given learning time for you, it really impacted our family because we kind of had to do it at a distance.
Mm-hmm.
It was your first go. He was 3 hours away in the mountains with a challenging community at best. And though a community, it was challenging. And so that was hard for us with the little kids and stuff, but it was needed for you and your future. I'm sure you'd agree. And so
Yeah.
that was a much different experience, even though it was amazing. We wouldn't trade it probably now. Like
Mm-hmm.
I would ask for a little more God's grace, even though He said I had it.
Uh-huh.
It was a much different experience than the second experience, right? Which was what? What was the second experience?
So that was March. My dad died on Jaden's birthday. So my mom was gracious enough to come down and be with Ian and the boys for birthdays. But my dad died on 2010 March 13th. So then it was not even 6 months later. So my mom was a breast cancer survivor. She had breast cancer when I was just finishing high school. And it wasn't very advanced. So she had a small lump removed, she had chemotherapy, radiation, and then they're like, your cancer is gone. So then in the same year, 6 months later, my mom called and was like, I think I have cancer. She said, I think I have. And then she called me like within the week. It was like, they decided I didn't have cancer. And I was like, oh, thank God. Like, can you imagine losing both your parents in the same year? So then she said, but the doctor said I should go back in 6 months and not just a year.
Mm.
So she did go back in 6 months. And sadly, the first 6 months prior, she had been misdiagnosed. So she went back 6 months later and she had cancer. So by this time, in between that time, so my dad died in March 2010, and I transitioned from hospital care to working with Hospice of the Valley in June. So, and the thing was, Hospice of the Valley did usually, their policy was they wouldn't take new employees on if they had had a death of a family member recently. But I had done a 1 day shadow with Hospice of the Valley during my 10 years at the hospital because in, or maybe that was the calling started. And they remembered me and put in a file if I came back around to consider hiring me, which I didn't know. That was a God thing.
Like an FBI file.
So they hired, there was 3 of us at the time they hired. And so that was in June. So I had already worked some time as becoming a team leader. I had learned quickly a lot about hospice and symptom management, and I did one-on-one care in the home. So then this was almost about a year later, my mom got the confirmation that it was cancer. And so I felt more prepared just hearing that she had cancer. So with her struggle, it was a little bit different. My mom was a nurse for many years in the medical field. She was good friends with her doctors. It was like family. So with my mom, it was this time it wasn't breast, it was lung cancer. My mom was a smoker for many years, and so they did a PET scan where they look at the whole body and they decide whether she has cancer anywhere else. And then so they decided, the oncologist decided, oh, she can just go to the surgeon and get her part of her lung taken out. So I said, okay. And I talked to her doctor at the time. And I said, can you send me her records, her PET scan? And so the doctor sends me her PET scan. So I reviewed her PET scan. Mind you, I'm only a nurse, I'm not a doctor. But I reviewed her PET scan and I noticed on the PET scan, the results showed what we call like it like glows, your body kind of glows with the PET scan. It showed a high upgrade in her other parts of her body. So what that showed was my mom had metastatic disease as well. She had advanced disease. And when you have advanced disease, you don't do surgery. So I remember just this time I felt more prepared to talk to doctors and to
Yeah,
communicate.
that's saying it very lightly, because I remember a couple of phone calls after you discovered that.
And
that was like, I think you planted a flag like, from here on out,
yeah,
I am gonna fight with both hands and feet for every single patient
yeah.
I ever talked to. I mean, like literally, that's what came out of you. I think.
Well, I remember that's one thing I learned in transplant and in dealing with cancer and because transplant wasn't just transplant. We did took care of a lot of liver cancer patients because it was a specialty. And I remember the surgeon saying, when you open up people with cancer, even if you don't know it's there, you feed the cancer. It's like it takes in all the air and it feeds it. So I thought, you're not going to open up my mom's lung and like
Kill her
feed her
quickly.
cancer.
Yeah.
So I just remember that, and so I called her one of her doctors that she worked for at the time, which was her primary doctor, and I was like, Dr. Martinez, did you look at her PET scan? He's like, oh no, well, I just assumed the surgeon knew, and she's scheduled for this to take her lung out. And I said, can you please review it with me right now on the phone? And he goes, oh my gosh, Carla, your mom has advanced metastatic cancer. And I said, yes. He goes, I need to call right now the surgeon and cancel her surgery and talk to her.
So at least there was somebody with integrity and accountability.
Yeah.
I mean, in the end, you were really merciful to that hospital and to that doctor. You really could have. Mm-hmm. We could have brought a case. Like, that was bad.
Yeah, I never talked to him, never seen him, he never called and said, I apologize to my mom. I was gonna cut you open and I was gonna
and schedule it. Like, it was like basically said it was okay. Like,
yeah, she was scheduled. I think it was maybe 2 days before she was gonna go in when I asked for it.
I mean, to this day I look at it and go, God, you're gonna grant us justice for something else because we didn't take that to the bank. But yeah.
But that made me also fed the idea like, who has a doctor that they can just call and say, hey, look at this with me? We don't have that anymore. Mm-hmm. So for me, then my mom saw that, and she had the same oncologist she had when she had breast cancer, which was good, but also difficult because
they're too close to
he's just too close to her. Right. So at this time, at Hospice of the Valley, we had started doing palliative care. I was understanding what palliative care is, because palliative care is a spectrum. So it's like, once Ian's diagnosed with cancer, no, he's on the spectrum.
He's not.
I know he's not. But then hospice is the last piece of the spectrum. So palliative care is somebody's going to die right now. You can be discharged from palliative care. Say your cancer's cured. Guess what? You're not on palliative care anymore. So, but at the time, oncologists were like anti-palliative care, and so by this time, long story short, in that my mom began chemotherapy. She just didn't respond well, and as far as weakness and fatigue and pain in her legs. And I remember one day I was at work and she called me. She's like, something weird just happened. My eyes got black and I had pain in my head. And I was like, I instantly went back to when my dad died. And I said, Mom, I think the cancer's in your brain. I think you just had an episode like a hemorrhage. She's like, what? And I told her, this is what happened when Dad died. And she's like, oh my goodness. So she called the doctor right away. I said, don't drive yourself. Call Uncle Roy and have him drive you. And so she went and had a scan of her head. And sure enough, she had a small bleed because the cancer had metastasized to her brain. Yeah. Right. And I thought, well, now it's in your brain. And this chemotherapy's not doing well. It's not going to cure you. So I still remember going to the oncologist appointment with her that day. And sadly, when we walked in, he hadn't reviewed her records. And he didn't realize it had spread to her brain. He didn't prepare to speak to her well. So then I mentioned to him, I was like, I really would like to bring on palliative care, actually hospice care now. And he looked at me and he said, absolutely not. No, this is about me and the patient, not anybody else. And I was like, absolutely, that is not a good approach. And that's her right, is to have other people to talk to. You know, I don't live here. I've moved myself here. She has every right to have a social worker, have somebody come clean, help her clean, all these things. She lives alone. It is her right to have that. Well, by the end of the week, he signed off on her to go onto hospice care. At the time, it was still called hospice. So that's when she began her journey, and she stopped chemotherapy, and she actually felt better in her last months of her life. And I was able to, at the time, I was a team leader in hospice, so I was able to work from home doing scheduling stuff. So I moved in with her at the time.
I was working from home.
And Ian was working from home. Actually, you and the boys ended up moving in.
You called us 4 weeks before, and you said, pack the bags.
And come move in with us.
Move in with us, and let's do this together, remember? Yeah. And then you explained to the boys, you taught. I mean, it was such a different experience for our boys because they were so close to your grandma, to your mom.
Yeah.
So they got to be a part of watching.
This was in June 2012 when you moved in. So this was just over 2 years since my dad died, but completely different approach. You know, my mom's like, oh, just put me in the one hospice unit and let me die there. I don't want to be a burden. And Mom, we can order you a bed. You can die and watch your
We had a
TV.
party. We had
you
friends
can smoke
come.
cigarettes till you die.
We had this big party for her.
And we had a party for her because her birthday was in May.
Yeah.
So we had a party for her.
So
she couldn't get out of the house.
Her. They could talk to her.
They came to the house. We have it on video. Her birthday in May 25th, she turned 70. So my dad died at 61 and my mom died at 70. But then she was like, okay, that sounds good. So she had the hospital bed because I knew how to talk about it. Mom, you're not a burden. You can die at home.
Lay with her and talk with her and joke with her. And
people would come visit her and chat with her, and she could smoke her cigarette or whatever. So literally, her hospital bed was in the living room, and the boys could sit with her and watch TV. We
could have EGs together.
EGs, just completely different. And I knew how to talk about death and to communicate and to advocate and tell her doctor no. Like basically, she's not a prisoner.
And your boys were grateful, right? They were grateful for that.
Yeah.
They've never spoken bad about that time. They've always been so grateful about
and
being a part of it.
God's mercy and grace. What would you call that, Ian? Theologically, I got that wrong.
His grace got you through it.
But the mercy of I think she was so prepared to die that, I mean, by then I had taken care of so many dying people and had seen horrific deaths and beautiful deaths, whatever, however you want to say. But my mom, what I would say, went into, we call it active state of dying, where you're like, she's going to die soon. It was only like maybe 8 hours between when my mom said her last word, when she went into a coma, and she died quickly.
I remember that.
And it was very, I guess, as peaceful as you can say, completely different than my dad. Yeah. Not that I didn't feel like I loved one of her, like did it wrong. I just didn't know.
Well, no, and God was merciful to give you the grace to get to walk through both.
Yeah. And it was nice because my mom had somebody to come help clean her. It wasn't just all on me because it's exhausting. And I was laughing because my dad was known for like sleeping with his eyes open at work. And I really started to understand what that meant. I really remember nights going, I think my eyes are open, but I think I'm sleeping. Because I wasn't watching her.
So your dad's process actually launched you into your calling.
Correct.
Your mom's passing didn't cause you to stop your calling.
It stopped it.
Yeah, so why?
I still remember the day we drove back from the oncologist when she said, I'm done. She's like, my daughter's right. Like, this is my choice. I'm done with this therapy. We were in the car and she looked at me and she's like, you can move wherever you want now. And I was like, what are you talking about? She's like, since you were really little, like 4 to you were 9, you wanted to move and have a clinic. And I was like, where all that? In Africa.
Yeah.
And I still remember the time we were talking a little bit about moving to Colorado.
It's all your fault we're in Africa.
We were talking about moving to Colorado with our best friends. And then she's like, but you can even go to Africa.
Yeah, friends, I wanted Japan or Australia.
She totally had tears in her eyes. We were parked in front of my childhood home where my older brother lives now. And I was like, she's accepted. Yeah. Kind of like my dad, his acceptance was, My kids are all grown, they're doing great, I can die. Literally, kind of the same with my mom. She was like, I'm gonna die, and I know if I was still here, you wouldn't follow your calling because you would want to take care of me. So then that so my mom died June 29th, 2012. And then I just knew then, like it became really clear. I didn't know what or when or what, but I knew that was the beginning of the journey of.
And your level of care, like, yeah, it definitely took you to another level for sure.
I mean, just the.
It wasn't long after, it was 2012, so you're talking only 36 months later, we were in Africa. So
when did we? So that was
February of 2015. And actually, I didn't realize that the month your dad died of 2000.
No, my dad died on March 13th, so it was.
When he got,
yeah. So I think this season is always like they say you have heart memory, and we're in the month of February. So that February to June is always like I can feel it in my heart.
So these are the reasons. These are the two major experiences I bet people didn't know it was your own parents.
My own parents.
Sometimes that's what it takes, is it to be that close to home for your calling to go. Callings don't happen overnight. They seem like they do, but that's why. This has been years and years and years of making. And so lead us into what the need is. You know, the people watching this video have gotten to see the progression of the clinic and stuff as I've posted the pictures within the video and stuff. But like, what's the need and the progression of the need for the pathology lab, for Raphael Clinic?
Well, part of this sustainability. I mean, everybody knows the political situation right now, even with funding and all of that. And I am all for people being sustainable. But part of that is on the person, that the calling of the person, the missionary, the expat, the NGO, to establish that sustainability. And that has not been done well. But it's something that I kind of pride myself in, is when I am doing ministry and humanitarianism, I'm looking how to make it sustainable. In Africa, something that takes 1 year in America takes 10 years here. So to get with palliative care and end of life care, the biggest thing is communication and compassion and modeling that for people. So I felt like I'm into it now in this area 8 years, and people are going, that's what it's about. It's not like somebody's dying and you're like the grave digger. So for me, I'm looking at palliative care and cancer care specifically, and end of life care as this like kind of package. So people may have been like, well, she already asked for this. Now why is she asking for this? And then she's asking for this. Because a lot of times missionaries or when we're doing projects, it's like we build a school and we're done. So in this case, I looked at building the clinic. It's like a health center specifically for palliative care. And Ian can post like what's left for finances for that. But in the process of that, I discovered like, okay, you can build this thing here in this one little village, but what is that impact
for the
province and sustainability when I leave? So then I moved into a provincial level and realized we don't have a pathology lab. We have a lot of cancer patients, and some we just know they have cancer, especially when you've been a nurse this long. You can literally assess somebody and be like, they have cancer. But that's not okay. People have the right to know if they have cancer or not, because we've seen people misdiagnosed, right? So we have no pathology lab here to say, hey, you have cancer, and it's this type of cancer, and we can treat it or not. So I thought, that's not sustainable. We need a pathology lab. Like if you're going to have a cancer program or a palliative care program honed in at cancer, you need a pathology lab. So at a provincial level, you have a program. So now I'm also funding to help educate, and thankfully I found a group of clinicians, over 20, that are self-motivated. They started their own association in Niassa for palliative care and cancer care. And we have a patient we're working with now that is establishing his own foundation because he has a terminal cancer diagnosis. So it's at a point where it can become sustainable. So that's why I told Ian, I think this is the time. God used to tell me, you can ask for $1 million. And Ian thought it was like just crazy. But God's like, this is the time, and this is why I'm asking you to ask for $1 million. So the Path Lab, the base of the Path Lab, I was given would be like 300,000. But ideally, you would probably look at 400,000, because also you have to look at when you're fundraising, cost of living changes. So you can start off at 300,000, but you need to
So there's the cost of cement. And
cost of
there's the-
cement
I mean, well,
and
I
cement.
shouldn't say
Cement's the
that.
biggest thing.
I shouldn't say that.
So that's why people are like, why are you just asking for money? No, no, no. I'm creating a program that's sustainable. At the same time, I'm educating and modeling. In the provincial hospital, we got permission to open a small palliative care unit to where people can transfer from ICU to a palliative care bed and they die there when they can't be managed at home. The goal is people die at home with their family, but that's not always possible. So when I was thinking, I got kind of I don't cry a lot because if you were a crier in Lifter, you'd be crying every day for the amount of death we see. But I think again, because it was the month of February, I said, I really feel I need to share why am I so passionate about palliative care and end of life care. It's not like everybody's doing that. And then we got an email yesterday from a pastor friend, and he mentioned like, oh, how's your family, Carla, and are they going to come visit you in Africa? And I thought, I don't really have, my parents aren't here, so it kind of triggered, I need to really share like why I'm doing what I'm doing. What's the why behind my calling besides God? And that's where my passion comes from. Of it's not acceptable to not die well. It's like because it's part of living. It's not you're a hospice nurse, you're about death. No, I'm about living well until the end of life. Like so for me, it's about dignity. Like Jesus on the cross brings dignity to all until he judges. We're not the judges. So like everybody deserves dignity until their life ends. And that means dying where they want to die and having choices. And I think that's a palliative care and end of life care is a human right. Like we talk a lot about rights a lot, but this is truly a human right to have like relief of suffering while you die.
That reaches all
humanity,
and that's why it's so important. So in summary, like the Lord or God breathed our first breath into us.
Yes. And he takes
but you tend to see with really clear eyes that he is also standing there at our last one.
Absolutely.
And that's important to you, that
absolutely
people get to understand that God's literally standing there with you at your last breath.
Yeah, and I think I'm not getting political, and don't take my words political in this, please, people. Like when we say we're pro-life, I believe that to my core, to the point of maybe I'm a pacifist. They would call me now, like I don't believe in the death penalty, and it's because I still remember when I was taking care of this patient, Eli. He was, I believe, from. Anyways, his family was involved in the war with Hitler and these things and that. But he was in a coma state, and the chaplain came to visit. I was doing 12-hour shifts in the home and one-on-one nursing care. And the chaplain came in, and we were talking at the side. It was such a great chaplain, great guy. And he's like, Carla, he was just so giddy. And I'm like, why is he so giddy? Isn't it amazing? He said that. Even now, Jesus is working with Eli. Like he's drawing out the dross, to bring Eli to himself when we can't. He's there in a coma, but Jesus is drawing him to himself, even now. And I was like, wow, like that's why we don't take people's life early. We don't choose when we take life because of that reason. But I also believe in the mercy of God that in those moments when lives are taken unjustly, even though we think it's just, that he is there to decide. I think sometimes that's where Catholics like the idea of purgatory, because it's like it seems fair, but there has to be something. So I just remember that, not to get political, but I believe in the sanctity of life to the point of death. That everybody, I say it, but even the people on death row and those people deserve to have a dignified death. Why? Because Jesus dying on the cross showed us that we deserve that, not because of ourselves, but because of him.
Wow, so that's a good way of concluding.
That's where I am, and that's why I continue to ask for support and your funding. It needs to be sustainable, and it can be where we are now. So thanks for listening to me, and Yeah, I mean, if you have any questions ever about anything I say, just private message me or
And if you
could
want to
chat.
give towards,
Give.
if her testimony's inspired you and you want to give towards this incredible vision of sustainability with palliative care, chronic care, all those things that we're dealing with in Africa, in the description are links that you can do that.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to her testimony.
Thank you.
And comment below. Make sure you make comments on this. Let's have a conversation about Carla's awesome testimony.